The Office of Management and Budget wants Congress to write 2 words into the next spending bill that could decide how fast the Navy's biggest warships get built. RETENTIONCHECKPOINT. 0 o'clock hook. USNI News reports that OMB is pushing to include funding anomalies for aircraft carrier and battleship programs inside the latest continuing resolution proposal, right as lawmakers scramble to avoid a lapse in federal spending. That's the confirmed fact this story rests on. Everything else, the exact dollar figures, which specific hulls, how Congress will respond, is still unsettled, and we're going to be careful about the line between the two. Here's where this is going. RETENTIONCHECKPOINT 030 resolution Ts. By the end of this video, you'll understand what a continuing resolution actually is, what a funding anomaly does inside one, why the Navy's heaviest shipbuilding programs need one right now, and what happens to a carrier's construction schedule if Congress says yes or says nothing at all. This isn't a dramatic story, it's a plumbing story. But the plumbing decides whether a 100,000-ton warship gets built on time or slips by a year. Let's start with what USNI News actually reported. OMB is seeking to fold funding anomalies for carrier and battleship-related programs into its latest continuing resolution language, part of the broader effort in Washington to keep the government funded past the current deadline. A funding anomaly, in this context, is a request from the executive branch asking Congress to let a specific program spend above the flat, prior year rate that a CR normally imposes on the entire government. What OMB's request tells us is simple. Someone inside the administration decided these Navy shipbuilding lines are too time-sensitive to wait on a full-year appropriations bill. One thing worth flagging honestly before we go further. The word battleship doesn't map cleanly onto today's Navy. The United States hasn't had a battleship in active commission since the Iowa-class ships were retired and turned into museum vessels years ago. So when a funding anomaly report uses that word, it's almost certainly shorthand, either for a heavy surface combatant program or just the language used inside a specific line item that public reporting hasn't clarified yet. USNI News is the only outlet with visibility into this right now, and it hasn't spelled out which exact program the term refers to. We're not going to guess a hull number or a program name to fill that gap. That's a real open question, and we'll come back to it. Here's the first real obstacle in this story, and it's a boring one, which is exactly why it matters. Continuing resolutions are supposed to be short bridges, a few weeks of flat funding while Congress finishes the real appropriations bills. In practice, Washington has leaned on them for years, sometimes stacking one CR on top of another for most of a fiscal year. Shipbuilders can't run a multi-billion-dollar carrier program on a month-to-month budget. Contracts with the big yards, Huntington Ingalls and Newport News, General Dynamics, Bath Iron Works, Electric Boat, are built around multi-year funding profiles with milestone payments tied to specific stages of construction: keel laying, hull erection, propulsion installation, sea trials. A flat CR rate can freeze a program at last year's spending level right when it's supposed to ramp up for the next milestone. That mismatch is the whole reason funding anomalies exist as a mechanism at all. I went back through how these anomalies have been used in past continuing resolutions, and the pattern holds up. They show up almost every year for a handful of programs Congress and the administration agree simply can't tolerate a funding gap: military pay, certain munitions, lines, and recurring big-ticket shipbuilding efforts. It's one of the few areas where a CR is allowed to bend instead of just holding flat. So this isn't some unprecedented emergency maneuver. It's a well-worn tool being reached for again. OMB has made its request. Congress hasn't acted on it yet. And that gap between a request on paper and an actual bill with actual votes is where this story could go a few very different directions in the next few weeks. Let's talk plainly about what a continuing resolution actually is, because the phrase gets thrown around a lot without explanation. When Congress fails to pass the individual appropriations bills that fund the government by the start of a new fiscal year, it can pass a continuing resolution instead. A stopgap law that keeps agencies operating at their prior year's funding levels, program by program, for a set period of time. A CR generally doesn't let new programs start, doesn't let production quantities rise beyond what was already funded, and doesn't allow major changes in how money gets allocated. It's built to keep the lights on, not to let anything grow. That default is exactly why a funding anomaly matters so much for something like an aircraft carrier program. Carrier construction isn't a steady, flat expense. Cost profiles rise and fall by year depending on what stage of the build the ship is in. A CR that locks spending at last year's number can, without an anomaly, starve a program during a year when it needed more, not less. This isn't a new complaint in the defense world, either. The Government Accountability Office has, over the years, published multiple reports flagging this exact problem. That repeated, extended reliance on continuing resolutions injects instability into major weapons programs, shipbuilding included, by disrupting the timing of contract awards and payments to industry. None of that is specific to this particular request. It's the general backdrop that makes OMB's move here unsurprising rather than alarming. When a CR is on the table, the agencies with the biggest, least flexible contracts go ask for carve-outs because the alternative is worse. It's also worth understanding, as background, how a modern aircraft carrier actually gets paid for, because it explains why a flat CR rate is such a poor fit. The Gerald R. Ford-class program, publicly reported to run well over $10 billion for the lead ship alone before factoring in research and design costs, is funded incrementally across multiple fiscal years under authorities Congress grants specifically for shipbuilding, letting the Navy commit to a ship's total cost over time rather than paying for it entirely up front. That incremental structure already assumes a functioning, year-by-year appropriations process behind it. A continuing resolution doesn't cancel that structure, but it can freeze that year's installment at an amount that no longer matches what the build schedule actually calls for. That's the technical gap a funding anomaly is built to close. Here's what strikes us about this whole mechanism, and it's worth sitting with for a second. The country's most expensive warships, carriers that run past $13 billion apiece before you count the air wing, stay on schedule not through a clean, predictable appropriations process, but through a patchwork of stopgap bills and case-by-case carve-outs that have to be re-requested and renegotiated almost every year. That's not a flaw in the ships. That's a flaw in how the government funds them. The second obstacle here is political, not technical. Continuing resolutions rarely pass without friction. Even when there's broad agreement that the government shouldn't shut down, lawmakers routinely disagree over what riders, exceptions, and anomalies get attached to the bill. A request from OMB isn't a guarantee. It has to survive negotiation between the House and Senate, between appropriators and leadership, and often gets traded against unrelated priorities that have nothing to do with defense. So even a request as narrow as a shipbuilding funding anomaly can get caught up in much bigger fights that have nothing to do with the Navy at all. Unpopular opinion, and we'll say it plainly. Funding the Navy's largest and most complex shipbuilding programs through a chain of temporary spending patches is a bad way to run a defense industrial base, regardless of which party controls Congress in a given year. Shipyards need multi-year certainty to hire welders, schedule steel deliveries, and plan overtime. A workforce that gets whiplashed by CR uncertainty every autumn doesn't build ships faster. It's a structural problem both parties have tolerated for over a decade, and this OMB request is just the latest example of a system managing its own dysfunction instead of fixing it. What do you think? Is leaning on funding anomalies a smart, flexible fix for a broken budget calendar? Or is it a Band-Aid that lets Congress avoid finishing its appropriations work on time? RETENTIONCHECKPOINT, 4 o'clock stakes bend. Here's the complication that raises the stakes on all of this. It isn't just paperwork moving slower. If a funding anomaly for these programs doesn't make it into the final bill, shipbuilders don't just pause and wait patiently. Delayed or reduced payments can force yards to slow hiring, defer material orders, or shift skilled workers onto other contracts to keep them employed. And once a specialized welder or pipe fitter moves to a different job, getting that same experienced worker back onto a carrier program later isn't automatic. The shipbuilding workforce is one of the tightest, most specialized labor pools in American industry. A gap of even a few months in funding certainty can ripple into a schedule slip measured in years, not weeks, because you can't hire your way out of a lost cohort of experienced tradespeople on short notice. That's obstacle number 3, and it's the one program managers actually lose sleep over. The workforce risk compounds every time a program goes through this same uncertainty. The Navy and its shipbuilding partners have flagged workforce retention as a persistent challenge across multiple major programs in recent years, independent of any single funding fight. Layer a CR-driven funding gap on top of that existing pressure, and the risk isn't hypothetical. It's additive. So OMB is asking for a fix. Congress hasn't said yes. And the shipyards, for now, keep building at the pace they were funded for last year, waiting to find out whether that pace is about to change and in which direction. There's a detail in how this story has been reported that stuck with us. USNI News frames this explicitly as a request OMB is pushing for, not something Congress has already agreed to, and not something with a finalized number attached. That distinction matters more than it might seem. A lot of defense reporting, once a story like this gets picked up and repeated across smaller outlets, tends to compress "the administration wants X" into "X is happening." It isn't happening yet. It's being requested. Whether it survives the next round of negotiations, and in what form, is still open. Put yourself for a second in the position of a program manager at one of these shipyards. You've got contracts, milestones, and a workforce plan built around a funding profile that assumes the anomaly comes through. You don't get to wait for Congress to finish arguing before you make hiring and scheduling decisions for next quarter. You have to plan against uncertainty, because the alternative, freezing everything until Washington sorts itself out, costs you the schedule anyway. Here's what's genuinely confirmed at this point, stated plainly. OMB has requested that funding anomalies for aircraft carrier and battleship-related programs be included in the next continuing resolution proposal, as reported by USNI News, in the context of Congress working to avoid a lapse in federal spending. That's the record. Here's what isn't confirmed: the specific dollar amounts involved, which precise hull numbers or contract line items the anomaly would cover, exactly which program the battleship reference is describing, and whether this language survives into whatever continuing resolution Congress ultimately passes. USNI News hasn't published those specifics as of this reporting, and until they do, or until an official Navy or OMB document does, we're not going to manufacture numbers just to make this sound more concrete than it is. That leaves a short list of genuinely open questions. What program does the battleship language actually refer to, and will subsequent reporting clarify the term? What's the dollar value of the requested anomaly, and how does it compare to the program's normal annual funding level? Will House and Senate appropriators accept OMB's request as written, modify it, or strip it out entirely during negotiation? And if the anomaly doesn't make it into the final bill, which specific milestone? A keel laying, a major component delivery, a sea trial? Is the first one at risk of slipping? One more open question worth naming, because it's easy to skip past. How long is the continuing resolution itself expected to last? A CR that runs a few weeks is a very different problem than one that stretches for months, because the longer a program sits on flat funding, the more the anomaly matters, and the more expensive any eventual delay becomes to unwind. USNI News' reporting, at least as of this video, focuses on the anomaly request itself rather than the broader duration of the CR it would sit inside. That piece of the picture is still forming as Congress negotiates. If you want to track this yourself instead of waiting for the next headline, there are a few places worth watching directly. USNI News is currently the only outlet with reporting on this specific request, so their coverage is the primary source. Naval News often follows up with additional shipbuilding industry context. The Navy's own press releases at Navy. Mill cover major program milestones as they happen. And the actual bill language, once introduced, is public record on Congress. Gov, along with the House and Senate Appropriations Committee websites, where funding anomaly requests eventually get itemized in committee reports. We cut a section from this video comparing this request to past carrier program funding anomalies line by line, mostly because we couldn't fully verify the dollar comparisons against public sources in time. Comment more if that's something you'd want us to come back and cover properly once the numbers are public. RETENTIONCHECKPOINT, last 60s payoff. For now, here's where this actually stands. A request has been made. A deadline is approaching. And somewhere between a line of budget language and a shipyard's next payroll cycle, the fate of some of the Navy's largest construction programs is being decided by people most viewers will never see testify on camera. We'll be watching for the next continuing resolution text to drop, and when the specific numbers and program names are confirmed, we'll bring you the follow-up with the same rule we followed here. If we can't source it, we don't say it.